He walked into the restaurant expecting nothing but a quiet dinner until a trembling little girl tugged at his coat and whispered, "Please marry my mother. She's all I have left." What began as a meal turned into a test of fate, secrets, love, and redemption that no one could have predicted. Subscribe for more. Heart-twisting stories that blur the line between fate and choice. The rain had just begun to fall when billionaire investor Reynold Carter stepped out of his black Rolls-Royce, sleek and alone, and entered the dimly lit Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, hoping to enjoy solitude over pasta after another day of signing million-dollar contracts and avoiding human connections. But what he didn't know was that his entire life was about to be rewritten by the most innocent voice he'd ever heard, because as he passed the rows of neatly arranged tables, a small hand grabbed the edge of his tailored coat and a timid, tear-stained voice whispered, "Please marry my mother. She's all I have left," causing him to freeze, confused, thinking maybe he misheard, and as he turned, his eyes met the frail little girl no older than 7, her oversized hoodie soaked, shoes torn and eyes desperate, clutching a teddy bear missing one eye, and before he could speak, the manager approached, flustered, saying the child had wandered in from the rain and must have been a mistake. But Reynold, for reasons he couldn't understand, raised a hand and said, "No, she's with me," surprising even himself, and guided the girl to a private booth, where he knelt and gently asked her name, to which she said, Amelia, and that her mother worked 2 jobs, barely came home, had lost her husband and her father to a construction accident 2 years ago, and that tonight her mom was supposed to come home with dinner but never did, so she walked out into the night searching, cold and hungry, and wound up here because the lights looked warm and fancy, and Reynold, despite his steely exterior and lifelong rule never to get involved with strangers, felt his heart thawed just a little and ordered soup for her while asking where she lived. She mumbled an address from memory that turned out to be a run-down building he vaguely remembered demolishing rights were being contested for. When they reached it, holding Amelia's hand, he met her mother, collapsed in a chair with blood trickling from a gash above her eyebrow, eyes fluttering from exhaustion, clearly overworked and underfed, and when she saw a man in a suit and her daughter holding his hand, she panicked, thinking he was CPS or police. But Amelia ran to her and whispered what she had said. "Mommy, I asked him to marry you," and her mother gasped, humiliated and apologetic, tears of embarrassment and pain mixing, introducing herself as Leela, and begging him not to call the authorities, swearing she didn't put Amelia up to anything. But Reynold just handed her a clean towel and told her to sit down before calling his private doctor, who arrived within 15 minutes and tended to her quietly. While Reynold waited outside, thinking he would leave after this, just another strange detour in his otherwise calculated life. But when the doctor came out and said, "She needs rest, food, and stability, she's running on empty," he found himself nodding, still unsure why. And over the next few days, he visited again and again, bringing groceries, arranging job interviews, sending hand-me-down books for Amelia, but each time, swearing to himself he'd stop soon, yet couldn't, because every visit chipped away at something cold inside him he hadn't known was there. Especially as Amelia began drawing him little pictures and calling him Mr. Ray with a hopeful smile that reminded him of his own younger sister who died young. And slowly, Lila began trusting him, telling him about her life before how she was once a graphic designer before her husband died, and bills forced her into waitress shifts and cleaning jobs. How every dream she had died with him, and how every breath since had been for Amelia. And Reynold began to see not a charity case, but a strong, beautiful woman hiding behind fatigue. And one night, as he tucked Amelia in after reading a story, she held his hand and asked softly, "Do you think I'll ever have a real dad again?" And something in him broke. But instead of answering, he kissed her forehead and left, shaken by how deeply involved he'd become. And that night he revisited old photos of himself smiling, something he hadn't done in years, and remembered how his own parents died in a plane crash when he was 10, and how he was raised in boarding schools, taught to suppress emotion, to seek success and control. Never mess, never chaos, never vulnerability, and yet here he was, checking his phone every hour to see if Lila texted, And the final push came the day Lila was fired from her job unfairly by a jealous supervisor, and Reynolds stormed into the diner in a rage, threatened a lawsuit. He took Lila and Amelia into his estate that same night, saying it was temporary, but it wasn't because weeks passed. Laughter returned to the halls of his mansion, Amelia's giggles bouncing off marble walls, Lila's art reappearing in the form of sketches and paintings, and Reynolds waking up earlier just to have breakfast with them. And soon, people began to whisper his board, his assistants, tabloids calling it a scandal. A charity case turned gold digger, but he didn't care, and neither did Lila, though she struggled with guilt, feeling like she didn't belong in a billionaire's world, especially when Reynolds gave her a studio to design again and paid too. Publish her first children's book illustrated with Amelia's doodles. And just when happiness felt within reach, tragedy struck a fire at Amelia's school. Chaos, smoke, and when Reynolds arrived at the scene, he found Lila collapsed in tears, screaming Amelia's name. And without a thought he ran into the building, flames licking his coat. His heart pounding, searching until he found Amelia huddled in a closet coughing and carried her out, collapsing beside her. Soot covered in sobbing, and that night in the hospital, while he held her hand, Lila looked at him with tear-glassed eyes and said, "You're her hero. And mine." And finally, he whispered, "I think I want to be your husband too." And she laughed through tears, nodding yes. And they married in a small ceremony in the park where Amelia first learned to ride a bike, and years later, as Amelia gave a speech at her graduation thanking her real dad, Reynolds sat beside Lila, holding her hand. No longer a man trapped by wealth and solitude, but someone saved by the smallest voice in a restaurant on a rainy night, and he often wondered, what would have happened if he hadn't turned around that night? Hadn't listened, hadn't stayed, but every time he saw his daughter smile, he knew. Sometimes miracles don't come with trumpets, they come with a trembling whisper and a one-eyed teddy bear. Want more powerful, emotional, and unpredictable stories like this? Subscribe for your next heart-wrenching twist of fate. Asterisk.